footage is shaky, almost frantic. A cell phone camera captures a petite woman being dragged by her hair, her head slamming against the unforgiving asphalt. Just hours later, that same woman would stop breathing, her life slipping away because of massive internal bleeding. The question hangs in the humid Atlanta air. Who turned jealousy into a death sentence? To answer that, we have to go back in time, back to the beginning, before the violence, before the tragedy. Ashley Bacanigra was born in 1991 in the Bronx, New York. She was a devoted single mother who had moved to a gated compound in Atlanta, hoping to build a safer, more stable life for her young child. On the surface, Ashley was like many others, a parent doing her best, juggling work and motherhood, carving out a piece of normalcy in a world that sometimes felt anything but safe. But the truth, as always, was far more complicated. Ashley worked the night shift at a hardware store, where she met and fell into a relationship with Daniel Gonzalez. Daniel wasn't just a co-worker, he was also a neighbor, living just a few doors down in the same compound. The connection seemed innocent enough at first, just two people looking for understanding. But behind closed doors, the lines between loyalty, love, and betrayal were already starting to blur. What began as a quiet struggle for happiness soon escalated into a storm of secrets, resentment, and suspicion. In the days and weeks that followed, that storm would grow, drawing in more lives, setting the stage for a chain of events that no one could stop. What could drive ordinary people to such extremes? The answer, as the investigation would soon reveal, was a web of jealousy, manipulation, and simmering rage, waiting for a single spark to ignite. Rewinding the clock, to truly understand what led to Ashley Bacanigra's final day, we have to look beneath the surface, into the lives, the relationships, and the quiet fractures that had begun to appear long before that fateful morning. Ashley, a Bronx native and a single mother, was known by friends as hard-working, warm, and fiercely protective of her child. When she decided to move to a gated community in Atlanta, her intention was simple: to give her son a life away from the chaos she'd known growing up. The compound offered security, stability, and a close-knit network of neighbors. It seemed, at least on the outside, like a fresh start. But the reality was much more complicated. Ashley had been living with Julian R., her partner, while holding down the night shift at a local hardware store. There, she crossed paths with Daniel Gonzalez, a co-worker and, coincidentally, a neighbor within the compound. Their connection quickly grew, evolving from casual conversation to something deeper, something neither of them seemed able or willing to stop. But Daniel's life wasn't simple either. He lived with his fiancée, Antonetta Stevens, a woman with her own insecurities and suspicions. There was also Daniel's younger sister, Janine, just 17, but wise beyond her years, and fiercely loyal to Antonetta. The lines between friend and family, loyalty and jealousy, quickly began to blur. In the summer of 2022, during a visit to Florida, Daniel made a confession that would change everything. He admitted to Janine that he'd been unfaithful with Ashley. Instead of keeping the secret, Janine ran straight to Antonetta. Jealousy began to boil over. Antonetta and Janine started tracking Daniel, monitoring his every move, desperate for proof and for revenge. But it didn't stop there. Antonetta, determined to confront Ashley, stole Daniel's phone and sent fake messages, luring Ashley out into the open. In a matter of days, jealousy would erupt into violence, setting the stage for a tragedy no one could reverse. Cracks in the foundation. But what drives ordinary people to the brink? In this case, it wasn't just one moment. It was a gradual buildup, a series of small betrayals and hidden resentments, all simmering beneath the surface. Daniel Gonzalez's home life was a complicated web. He shared his apartment with his fiancée, Antonetta Stevens, and his younger sister, Janine Gonzalez, a tight-knit trio in the eyes of their neighbors. But behind closed doors, tensions were rising. Antonetta and Janine, though not blood-related, were inseparable. Janine, at just 17, looked up to Antonetta as a role model, almost like a second sister. The two spent hours together, confiding in each other about their fears and suspicions, especially when it came to Daniel. That summer in Florida, Daniel made a confession that would change everything. He admitted to Janine that he had cheated on Antonetta with Ashley Bacanigra, their neighbor and Daniel's co-worker. Janine, perhaps too young to understand the consequences, immediately told Antonetta. The admission sparked a fire that no one could put out. Jealousy became obsession. Antonetta and Janine began watching Daniel closely, scrutinizing every text message, every phone call. The trust that once held their family together began to unravel, thread by thread. Antonetta wasn't satisfied with passive suspicion. She took matters into her own hands, stealing Daniel's phone one night and impersonating him in messages to Ashley. With calculated precision, she set a trap, luring Ashley out of her home. For Ashley, the invitation must have seemed like just another message from Daniel, a chance to clear the air or perhaps settle things once and for all. But she had no idea what was waiting for her. It's easy to look back and see the warning signs: jealous whispers, secret meetings, a sense of foreboding that lingered in the compound's quiet hallways. But in the moment, each person believed they were justified. Each believed they were protecting someone they loved. Was it loyalty or was it something darker? In the end, the lines blurred beyond recognition, setting the stage for a confrontation that would prove fatal. The night. Everything changed. August 2022. The heat in Atlanta hung heavy, pressing down on the compound like a warning. For Ashley Bacanigra, it began as an ordinary morning. She left her home, responding to a text she believed was from Daniel Gonzalez. It was a simple message, a meeting point, a time, a request. Ashley, tired from a long shift, likely hoped this would be a chance to finally settle things, but fate had other plans. Out on the quiet stretch of the compound's inner road, Antonetta Stevens was waiting, not with words, but with anger. As soon as Ashley arrived, Antonetta charged forward. The confrontation was sudden and violent. Janine, Daniel's sister, stood nearby, her phone recording every second of the chaos. What followed was nearly 13 minutes of brutality. Antonetta grabbed Ashley by the hair, yanking her downward. Ashley's head slammed against the hard, sun-baked pavement. There were shouts, curses, a flurry of rage boiling over. At one point, Antonetta bit Ashley on the face, tearing at her skin in a moment of desperation and fury. Janine, phone in hand, joined in, not to help, but to escalate. She kicked Ashley, targeting her head and chest, each blow captured in digital clarity. Ashley managed to break free, stumbling and dazed. Her phone had been snatched away, her face bloodied, her ribs fractured. Still, she somehow made it back home, her steps unsteady, her breaths shallow. Hours later, she arrived at the emergency room, collapsing from exhaustion and pain. Doctors would later discover a series of devastating injuries: broken ribs, a torn liver, severe internal bleeding. Despite their efforts, Ashley's body gave out. She died just hours after the attack, her final moments marked by confusion and unimaginable pain. Neighbors who had witnessed pieces of the assault called 911, their voices tense with shock. But for Ashley, help arrived too late. In less than a day, an ordinary conflict had transformed into a tragedy, one that would haunt her family and the entire Atlanta compound for years to come. The investigation unfolds. In the hours after Ashley Bacanigra's death, the Atlanta Police Department launched a full-scale investigation. Word of the violence had already spread through the compound. But in those first moments, the story was tangled, a blur of confusion, half-truths, and shifting blame. When officers arrived at the scene, Antonetta Stevens claimed it had been a mutual fight. She insisted that Ashley had attacked her, and that both women had gotten out of control. But her words didn't match the injuries doctors found on Ashley, nor did they explain why Janine Gonzalez, just 17, had stood by, filming the entire assault with her phone. When detectives reviewed the footage, it revealed not a chaotic brawl, but a calculated, prolonged attack. There was little doubt who had been the aggressor. Janine herself was called in for questioning. Her demeanor was unsettling. She laughed and joked, seemingly unaware of the gravity of what had happened. In her version of events, she minimized her role, insisting she had only tried to help her brother's fiancé. But her own video, combined with the injuries cataloged by medical examiners, told a different story. Investigators began piecing together the digital trail. They extracted messages from Daniel Gonzalez's phone, conversations that revealed the deception, the fake messages sent by Antonetta, and the desperate attempts to lure Ashley out. One message from Ashley stood out. A final text, sent in the moments before her collapse. "I can't breathe. Kicked in the chest, the heart." Her pain was immediate and unmistakable. Police also recovered footage from Ashley's home intercom system. It showed her returning after the attack, barely able to stand, her voice weak and her movements slow. Friends and neighbors described her as broken, both physically and emotionally. In the face of mounting evidence, the story Antonetta and Janine had tried to sell began to crumble. The case, once a maze of uncertainty, was suddenly illuminated by a series of damning facts, each more difficult to refute than the last. The turning point. It's often said that a case can turn on a single piece of evidence. In this investigation, it was a 13-minute video recorded by Janine Gonzalez herself that would become the linchpin, the undeniable proof of what had truly happened on that hot Atlanta day. Detectives watched the footage, frame by frame. Every detail mattered. The sound of Antonetta's voice as she threatened Ashley, the thud as Ashley's head hit the ground, Janine's laughter as she filmed, and later, the moment she joined in, kicking Ashley while she was already defenseless. Medical examiners compared the exact timing of the kicks with Ashley's fatal injuries: a ruptured liver, internal bleeding, and multiple fractured ribs. The connection was chilling. The violence captured in real time. Impossible to deny or explain away. But the video wasn't the only damning evidence. Investigators also analyzed the web of digital messages, the fake texts sent from Daniel's phone by Antonetta, the desperate final words from Ashley's own device. "I can't breathe. They kicked me in the chest." Forensic technicians traced the manipulation back to Antonetta, uncovering how she had stolen Daniel's phone, impersonated him, and set the entire ambush in motion. The story Antonetta and Janine had constructed, a tale of mutual combat, a misunderstanding, fell apart under the weight of evidence. Even their attempt to blame Ashley for starting the fight crumbled when police retrieved footage from Ashley's home intercom. It showed her staggering back, bloodied and battered, barely able to make it inside. As prosecutors built their case, it became clear that this wasn't a simple neighborhood dispute. It was a premeditated act, fueled by jealousy, driven by rage, and enabled by the silence or apathy of those who stood by. By the time the case reached court, the facts were undeniable. The video, the texts, and the forensic evidence had stripped away any lingering doubt. What began as a simmering feud had turned, in a matter of minutes, into an irreversible tragedy. The trial and the verdict. By the time the case made its way to the Fulton County Courthouse, the story had already gripped Atlanta. News cameras lined the courthouse steps, and community members whispered about the violence that had shattered their once quiet compound. But in the courtroom, the only thing that mattered was the evidence and the search for justice for Ashley Bacanigra. Both Antonetta Stevens and Janine Gonzalez faced serious charges: aggravated assault, robbery, and manslaughter. The prosecution argued that this was not an accident, but a calculated attack, set in motion by jealousy and deceit. The video recorded by Janine was played for the jury in full, the room silent except for the sounds of violence echoing from the screen. Medical examiners took the stand to describe Ashley's injuries in detail: the broken ribs, the ruptured liver, the internal bleeding that ultimately claimed her life. Defense attorneys tried to argue that the fight had gotten out of hand, that emotions had run high, and no one intended for anyone to die. But the digital evidence told a different story. Jurors heard about the stolen phone, the fake messages, and the calculated way Antonetta and Janine had lured Ashley out that morning. The testimony was damning. Witnesses described the aftermath, how Ashley staggered home, broken and barely conscious. After days of testimony and hours of deliberation, the verdict came in. The jury found both Antonetta and Janine guilty on all counts. The sentence was severe but fitting. Each woman was handed a 20-year prison term with no chance of early parole. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom. This was a senseless tragedy, fueled by jealousy and violence, with consequences that can never be undone. For Ashley's family, the verdict brought a measure of closure, but it could never fill the void left by her absence. Justice had been served, but the scars would remain, a permanent reminder of how quickly life can change, and how easily love can curdle into hate. Aftermath and lessons learned. When the trial ended and the cameras turned away, what remained was an unfillable emptiness. Ashley Bacanigra's young child was left without a mother, robbed of guidance, comfort, and the simple security of a parent's love. Friends and neighbors in the Atlanta compound came together to raise money for Ashley's funeral expenses, organizing donations, meals, and small gestures of support. But no collection plate could ever heal the pain her family endured. The loss rippled outward, touching everyone who had known Ashley. She had moved to Atlanta seeking safety, determined to build a better life for her child. In the end, her efforts had not been enough to shield herself, or those she loved, from the storm of jealousy and violence that found her. For many in the community, her death was a wake-up call, a reminder that even the safest neighborhoods can harbor secrets, and that unchecked anger can quickly spiral out of control. As the weeks passed, the compound slowly returned to its routines, but nothing felt the same. Parents walked their children with an extra layer of caution, casting wary glances at once familiar faces. Some whispered about warning signs they'd missed: the late-night arguments, the suspicious looks, the uneasy tension that had built up between neighbors. Others spoke out, calling for more resources for victims of domestic violence, more education about the warning signs of jealousy and manipulation. But perhaps the deepest lesson was this: when jealousy turns to rage, when bystanders choose silence, tragedy is never far behind. Ashley's story became a somber reminder that violence thrives in shadows, and that every person has a role in breaking the cycle. The community mourned her, but also vowed to do better, to look out for one another, and to never let indifference pave the way for another senseless loss. The death of Ashley Bacanigra was more than just a tragedy. It was a stark warning about the destructive power of jealousy, deception, and unchecked violence. What began as private suspicions and secret messages escalated, in just a matter of days, into an irreversible loss. Through careful investigation, prosecutors uncovered the truth. Ashley was targeted, lured, and attacked by those driven by resentment. In the end, the evidence was undeniable, and justice was served, but at a price no sentence could ever repay. Ashley's story reminds us that beneath the surface of everyday life, powerful emotions can simmer, waiting for a spark. When that spark comes, it is often too late to turn back. This case stands as a somber lesson for families, friends, and communities everywhere. Vigilance and compassion are our best defenses against the kind of tragedy that can shatter lives in an instant. If Ashley's story moved you, don't let it end here. Speak up for those in danger. Reach out to friends or neighbors who may be struggling. And if you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence or abuse, don't wait. Contact your local support services or law enforcement. One voice can make all the difference. Like and subscribe for more true crime stories that seek not just to uncover the truth, but to honor the lives at the center of each case.